Tongue for rent. Marla took her golden retriever Luke on the same walk every day. Every day, Luke trotted along, smelling the bushes, trees, and flowers, and marking all the same spots. They would stop and rest in the same park every day. As they sat, they would gaze through the sinister chain-link fence at the dark city across the water and thank God they weren't over there, but safe on their island. This safe routine was interrupted one day by something as small as a sign in a front yard. It was spring, but the clouds still hung in the sky, casting a gray tone to the air. Even though the sun peeked through every now and then, Marla wore a bright red coat that reached past her rear. Despite the mottled gray sky, everything seemed to be painted in the brightest, truest colors possible. The flowers, grass, and even the unsettled ocean sang their colors for the world. Marla and Luke walked along leisurely, sniffing the air and taking in the beauty of the island. They had been walking for 20 minutes and were heading home down a normal residential street when suddenly Luke stopped dead in his tracks. His stop was so abrupt, Marla nearly toppled over the retriever. Luke sniffed at the air frantically and whined. "What's wrong, old dog?" Marla asked, looking in the direction Luke was sniffing. The dog stared at a house Marla had never noticed before. She felt strange standing in front of this impossible house. She'd taken this route every day since she was a young girl, when her family first moved from the city. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't ever remember seeing this particular house before. The house was set back from the road by several meters. The yard was overgrown, but didn't look shabby. 10 bright orange tulips bloomed in the middle of the large yard. There was a rusty boat sitting on a dilapidated trailer in the driveway. The house itself was large, 2 stories, and white with green trim. It looked older, needed a new paint job, and was a bit run down. Not scary diseased people living inside run down, just run down like its owners were elderly or disabled and couldn't take care of it. What was most puzzling was the sign stuck in the lawn near the rusted boat declaring "Tongue for rent." Marla didn't know what to think of the sign. She remembered seeing signs like that when she was very young and still lived in the city, but she couldn't remember what they meant. She decided to go ask. This was her safe island after all. Marla shook the leash to knock Luke out of his trance. "Come on, Luke, let's see what that sign means," Marla said. She started to make her way up the driveway. Her hand jerked slightly. She looked back. Luke sat near the front of the boat and wouldn't move. "Come on, boy," Marla said sweetly. The dog only looked at her gravely and stayed seated. "Fine." She walked back towards the dog and secured his leash to the rusty trailer the boat sat on. "I'll be right back." She pet the dog once and then made her way across the lawn. Luke whined and let out a few strangled, high-pitched barks as she made her way towards the house. The front door stood open with the screen closed and locked. Marla knocked on the screen. Out of the darkness of the house, an old man hobbled towards her. He was terribly hunched over, so much so that he only came as high as Marla's stomach. His wispy white hair hung limply about his wrinkled face. He looked up at Marla through tiny, beady eyes, which were barely visible in all the wrinkled, papery skin. He was atrociously thin. His once white, long-sleeved shirt and greenish drawstring pants hung on him like rags on an unstuffed scarecrow. "Well?" He had a raspy sandpaper voice. "Your sign, tongue for rent," Marla began. "What does it mean?" The old man's eyes glittered unpleasantly. "Come in." He pushed the screen door open and stood aside. Marla slowly moved into the entryway and stood stiffly, her hands hanging at her sides. The old man closed the front door with a bang and moved around to face Marla. "So, you want to know about the tongue for rent?" the old man asked. The house creaked quietly, as if asking its own question. "Well, no, I wondered what the sign meant," Marla said, looking around. The house's interior was damp and gray as the sky outside. Dust covered the sparse furniture and the banister to the second story. "All right, then," the man smiled. But it wasn't a kind smile. It was quite unsettling, showing rows of rotted-out teeth. "The sign means I have a tongue to rent if you need one." "Literally, you have a tongue?" Marla asked, looking into the man's watery, beady eyes. She was beginning to see what she'd walked into. A sweat broke out on her forehead, but she tried to remain calm. That's what the authorities over the water always tell you to do. "Yes, I have lots of things for rent," the old man said. Marla lost control of her calm and began to panic. She had heard of renting body parts in the city across the water, but to think of it here on her island where it was safe? She was certain what she'd walked into now. How could she not have seen it? She had to get out. She knew that. She had no need to rent anything, and they hated when you wasted their time. How did he even make it to the island? He was the whole reason for the bridges into the city being destroyed, because of the disease and the grotesque people seeking refuge and looking to rent out body parts to the diseased. That was the reason for the large, ugly, electrified fences lining the whole of the island. The only two entrances on the island were heavily guarded, almost impossible to get through, unless you were some sort of doctor or authority. They had to keep the diseased and disgusting out in order to live their daily lives without interruption. Marla searched for words as she backed up a step. "But that's illegal. You can't rent out body parts," Marla said. "It may be illegal in the city, but here there are no laws. Did you know that?" the old man asked. Marla nodded. There wasn't any need for laws. Only decent people lived on her island. Rules and restrictions weren't necessary. Everyone knew everyone. How did you get here?" Marla's voice shook. She took another step backwards towards the door. "There are ways." The man pushed the sleeves of his baggy long-sleeve shirt to reveal severely burned hands and arms. Marla looked away from the gruesome sight. As she turned her head away, she caught a glimpse from the room next door. The room that should have been the living room. It was lined with shelf after shelf of body parts in jars, floating placidly in liquid. "Need something?" the old man asked. Marla had backed up against the front door. She felt for the knob. "No, thank you." Her hand found it and attempted a twist. It was locked. Marla felt panic settling in. "I'm running low on eyes. Yours are lovely." Marla fumbled with the lock, managed a quick twist, and flung the door open. But the old man, with surprising strength and agility, grabbed her arm and flung her into the living room filled with body parts. The front door slammed, causing the jars to clink together. All Marla could hear was the sandpaper laughing of the old man and Luke barking outside.